They mocked him, a bankrupt millionaire, Malik Rivers, standing in a courtroom, announcing he wanted to adopt a homeless black girl. A publicity stunt. They scoffed. He can't even save himself. But Malik didn't flinch. He saw something in her eyes, pain. Yes, but brilliance too. What he didn't know was that this little girl, abandoned and forgotten, held a secret that would not only change his life, but rewrite the future of the entire town. Because sometimes, the one everyone overlooks is the one who holds the key to redemption. Malik Rivers, a 32-year-old black school counselor, felt the crisp autumn air bite at his face as he walked into Northwood High, the gentrified suburb, with its manicured lawns and quaint coffee shops, often felt like a meticulously painted facade, barely concealing the cracks of old biases that still ran deep beneath its surface. Today, the facade was about to crumble, not just for him, but for everyone who pretended not to see them. The tension in the auditorium was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket of whispers and nervous shuffling. Principal Hastings, a man whose smile rarely reached his eyes, stood at the podium, his posture rigid, a thin, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the screeching microphone, and the auditorium fell silent. Every eye fixed on him. Parents, teachers, students. Hastings began, his voice dripping with feigned concern. We are gathered today to address a deeply troubling incident that has shaken the very foundation of trust within our esteemed institution. Malik, seated among the faculty, felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew, with an icy certainty, that this was about him. For weeks, subtle rumors had been circulating, hushed conversations among staff, pointed looks from parents. It was a well-orchestrated campaign, he realized now, designed to isolate him, to prime the community for this public spectacle. He straightened his tie, his gaze steady, refusing to betray the anxiety coiling within him. He met the eyes of Coach Miller, a burly, good-natured history teacher, who offered a subtle nod of encouragement, a small gesture of solidarity in a room full of sharks. Hastings continued, his voice rising in volume. As many of you are aware, Northwood High prides itself on fostering an environment of fairness and equal opportunity for all students. It is with immense regret that I must inform you that an incident has occurred which directly contradicts these core values. A serious breach of protocol involving confidential student records and accusations of preferential treatment has come to our attention. He paused, allowing his words to hang heavy in the air, creating a vacuum of speculation. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the faces in the crowd, lingering for a fraction too long on Malik. A restless murmur rippled through the audience. Parents exchanged worried glances. Students shifted uncomfortably. Then, Hastings turned his full attention to Malik, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, yet still booming through the speakers. Mr. Rivers, would you care to enlighten us further on the nature of this preferential treatment? Malik felt a jolt. This was it, the direct confrontation. He stood, his movements deliberate, every fiber of his being radiating calm despite the storm raging inside. He walked towards the stage, the collective gaze of hundreds pressing down on him like a physical weight. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed to intensify, casting harsh shadows that distorted faces into grimacing masks. He reached the edge of the stage, hands clasped loosely in front of him, and faced Hastings. Principal Hastings. Malik's voice was clear, resonant. I believe you are referring to my recent intervention regarding Rosa Martinez's scholarship application. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Rosa Martinez, a bright Latina student from a low-income family, was widely known as a top academic performer. She had been a strong candidate for the prestigious Hawthorne Scholarship, but whispers had begun circulating that her application had been unfairly overlooked. Hastings scoffed, a dismissive sound that grated on Malik's nerves. Intervention, Mr. Rivers. You accessed private school records without authorization. You then proceeded to challenge the integrity of the scholarship committee's decision, implying bias where none existed. Your actions have caused undue distress to the committee and have created a divisive atmosphere among our student body. His voice became louder, more accusatory. Furthermore, you insinuated that the committee's decision was racially motivated, an egregious and unfounded accusation that undermines the very fabric of this school's commitment to diversity and inclusion. The word racially hung in the air, a silent accusation against Malik. Hastings had skillfully twisted Malik's advocacy for Rosa into a personal vendetta, painting him as the aggressor, the one introducing racial discord. A few parents in the front rows began to whisper angrily, their faces contorted with indignation. Malik knew this was the trap, the carefully constructed narrative designed to turn public opinion against him. I challenged the decision, principle, because the committee's rationale for denying Rosa was inconsistent with her outstanding academic record and community involvement, Malik stated, his voice unwavering. And yes, I suggested that the lack of transparency, coupled with the fact that every other candidate who was selected was not a student of color, raised legitimate questions about implicit bias. He deliberately used the term implicit bias, aiming for clarity, not accusation, but Hastings seized on it. Implicit bias, Mr. Rivers, are you suggesting this committee, comprised of dedicated, selfless individuals, harbors prejudice? Hastings thundered, his face reddening dramatically. He gestured broadly towards the committee members, who sat stony-faced in the front row, their expressions a mixture of indignation and rehearsed neutrality. This is an outrage, an attack on the character of our staff, a baseless accusation of racism that has no place in this community. You have used your position to sow discord, to manipulate a deserving student, and to inflame racial tensions within Northwood High. The crowd erupted in a chorus of murmurs, some sympathetic, but many outright hostile. A few parents began to openly glare at Malik. He could feel the weight of their judgment, the instant transformation from respected counselor to dangerous agitator. Hastings had successfully demonized him, turning his principled stand into an act of aggression. As a result of Mr. Rivers' highly unethical and unprofessional conduct, Hastings continued, his voice now a booming pronouncement. The scholarship application process has been severely compromised. We have been forced to reevaluate the entire committee's selections, causing significant delay and distress to all applicants. Such reckless behavior cannot be tolerated. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Therefore, effective immediately, Mr. Malik Rivers is suspended from his duties as school counselor, pending a full internal investigation. His access to school premises and records is revoked. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. Malik felt a sharp, unexpected pain in his chest, not from shock, but from the raw, public betrayal. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed on Hastings, who now wore an expression of triumph. This wasn't just a suspension, it was a public execution of his career, a deliberate shredding of his reputation in front of the very community he served. He saw Rosa, her eyes wide with fear and shame, shrinking in her seat. He saw Tanya, his journalist neighbor, furiously scribbling notes in a small notepad, her eyes flashing with anger. Eli, his loyal dog, wasn't here, but Malik wished for his steady presence, a grounding force against the storm. A parent, a woman in the front row, stood up, her face twisted with fury. He should be fired, she shouted, her voice shrill, bringing racism into our schools, dividing our children. Others joined in, a cacophony of angry voices rising around him. Malik remained impassive, his expression unreadable. Though a muscle twitched in his jaw, he was a symbol now, not of advocacy, but of the very racial tension Hastings had accused him of creating. The humiliation was absolute, a searing brand on his professional life. Delivered under the harsh glare of public scrutiny, he had tried to be a bridge, but they had burned it down, leaving him stranded on the wrong side. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the faces of the community. memorizing the hostility, the fear, the calculated indifference. This was the moment his silence ended. The humiliation of the assembly still burned, a phantom heat on Malik's cheeks. As he walked out of Northwood High, the autumn sun, once bright and welcoming, now felt like a spotlight on his disgrace. His suspension meant immediate exclusion, a severance from the very purpose that had driven him for years. The injustice wasn't just about his career, it was a reopening of old wounds, a familiar echo of a past that had taught him the harsh lessons of silence and endurance. He drove home on autopilot, the suburban streets blurring into a monotonous pattern of green lawns and identical houses. His mind replayed the scene in the auditorium. Hastings' theatrical indignation, the parents' hostile glares, the chilling sense of being utterly alone against a system that had already decided his guilt. But beneath the fresh sting of betrayal, an older, deeper pain stirred, a memory that often lay dormant but never truly faded. He pulled into his driveway, the quiet solitude of his house, a stark contrast to the cacophony he had just escaped. Eli, his loyal golden retriever, met him at the door, tail wagging furiously, a soft toy clutched in his mouth. Malik knelt, burying his face in Eli's fur, finding a momentary solace in the dog's unconditional affection. "Hey, boy," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "Rough day." Eli licked his hand, a warm, comforting presence, as he settled onto his couch. The memory unfurled, vivid and relentless. Malik was 18, a promising basketball player in his senior year of high school in a small, predominantly white town in rural Ohio. His best friend, Jamal, was a whirlwind of energy and ambition, an aspiring journalist with a fierce sense of justice. They were inseparable, bound by shared dreams and the unspoken understanding of being two of the few black faces in a sea of white. One crisp October evening, after a particularly intense basketball practice, Malik and Jamal were walking home. They passed a local diner, its neon sign flickering, when a group of older white teenagers, known troublemakers, emerged. Words were exchanged, taunts laced with racial slurs. Malik, usually the more composed of the two, felt a surge of anger. Jamal, ever the fiery one, retorted, his voice cutting through the night air. The situation escalated quickly. Shoves turned into punches. Malik remembered the cold shock of a fist connecting with his jaw, the metallic taste of blood. He fought back, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to protect Jamal, but they were outnumbered. As he struggled, he saw Jamal, pushed against the diner wall, his head hitting the brick with a sickening thud. The assailants fled into the darkness, leaving Malik battered and bruised, kneeling beside Jamal, who lay motionless. The ambulance arrived, its sirens piercing the quiet night. At the hospital, the news was grim, a severe concussion, internal bleeding. Jamal's parents, their faces etched with terror, arrived shortly after. The police took Malik's statement, but their questions felt dismissive, their gaze skeptical. They hinted at a mutual altercation, downplaying the racial slurs, suggesting Malik and Jamal had provoked the fight. Malik, still reeling from the shock and the sight of Jamal's pale face, felt a rising panic. He recounted every detail, the racial slurs, the unprovoked attack, the assailant's escape. But the officer scribbled notes without eye contact, his expression conveying a prejudgment. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, whispered consultations, and the chilling realization that the system was already working against them. The school administration, concerned about their reputation, advised Malik to keep quiet, to let the authorities handle it. His basketball coach, a man he had respected, urged him to focus on his college scholarship, warning him that speaking out could jeopardize his future. "Don't rock the boat, Malik," he'd said, his voice low. "You have too much to lose." Jamal eventually recovered, but the incident left him with lingering headaches and a profound sense of disillusionment. The police investigation fizzled out. The assailants were never charged. The case officially closed as an unresolved dispute. The town, eager to forget the unpleasantness, moved on. Malik had been urged to stay silent by those who claimed to care about his future, and he had complied. The fear of losing his scholarship, of jeopardizing his chance at a better life, had been a powerful deterrent. He saw the cold indifference in the eyes of the police, the dismissive pats on the back from school officials, the subtle but firm pressure to conform. He learned that speaking truth to power, especially when you were black in a small white town, often meant sacrificing everything. He watched Jamal's vibrant spirit dim, replaced by a quiet bitterness, and felt the heavy weight of his own unspoken truth. He carried the guilt of his silence, the lingering question of whether he could have done more, whether his voice, if raised louder, could have changed anything. The memory of Jamal's lifeless form on the pavement and the subsequent systemic cover-up forged in him a deep-seated caution, a belief that endurance, rather than confrontation, was the only way to survive. He had become a counselor because he wanted to be the advocate he never had, to protect students from the very injustices he had faced. He had spent years advising students to speak their truth, to fight for their rights, all while a part of him still clung to the lessons of his own past. That silence, though painful, could sometimes be a shield. Today, however, Hastings' public shaming, the deliberate twisting of his intentions, had ripped that shield away. The echo of "Don't rock the boat" was loud in his mind, but it was now met with a powerful counter-voice, Jamal's unwavering spirit, and the knowledge that silence had cost them dearly then. This time, the price was too high to pay. He would not be silenced again. The weight of his plea, once a burden, was now a catalyst. He would not just endure, he would fight. The suspension hit Malik with a quiet, insidious force, far more pervasive than the public humiliation itself. He tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, rising at his usual time, making coffee, and walking Eli through the familiar, tree-lined streets of his neighborhood. But the routine felt hollow, stripped of its purpose. The constant hum of Northwood High, once a central part of his day, was now a silent, gaping void. The initial shock of the public shaming gave way to a chilling realization the battle was far from over. Hastings had not merely suspended him, he had initiated a systematic campaign to isolate and discredit him. The very first indication came with the official notification from the school board. It was a sterile, impersonal letter, detailing the terms of his suspension and the commencement of an independent investigation. The investigator, a retired administrator named Mr. Thorne, was known for his close ties to the district's old guard, a fact that immediately signaled the investigation's predetermined outcome. Malik's attempts to schedule a meeting with Thorne were met with polite but firm stonewalling. Calls went unreturned, emails unanswered for days, then weeks. When a meeting was finally granted, it was brief and perfunctory. Thorne's questions clearly designed to confirm existing biases rather than uncover truth. He showed little interest in Malik's detailed account of Rosa Martinez's case or the evidence of racial disparity in scholarship selections. The message was clear: this was a formality, a performance of due diligence before the inevitable verdict. The social fabric of the community, once welcoming, subtly shifted around him. Casual acquaintances who used to greet him with a friendly wave now averted their gaze or offered curt nods. Parents, once quick to praise his work with their children, now steered clear, their conversations hushed as he approached. He felt the cold shoulder of polite society, a chilling ostracization that spoke volumes without a single word being uttered. At the local grocery store, a woman he recognized from the PTA pulled her shopping cart away abruptly when he neared, her eyes darting away as if he carried a contagion. These small, insidious acts of avoidance chipped away at his sense of belonging. Reinforcing the narrative Hastings had spun, his professional network also began to fray. Colleagues at Northwood High, many of whom he considered Romans, became distant. A few, like Coach Miller, offered hesitant words of support in private texts, But their public silence was deafening. Malik tried to reach out to a former mentor, a highly respected educator in a neighboring district, hoping for advice or even just a sympathetic ear. The mentor, usually quick to respond, took days to reply, his email brief and formal, advising Malik to cooperate fully with the investigation and offering no actual support or guidance. The fear of association, of being tainted by the racism scandal, was palpable. It was a subtle yet powerful form of professional blacklisting, shutting down avenues of support he might have otherwise pursued. The school also moved swiftly to control the narrative around Rosa Martinez. A week after Malik's suspension, an email went out to all parents announcing a comprehensive review of the scholarship process, emphasizing the school's commitment to fairness and equity. They subtly reframed the issue, implying that the controversy had been resolved and that the school was proactively addressing it, deflecting blame from the initial flawed process and subtly reinforcing the idea that Malik had disrupted an otherwise smooth operation. The email made no mention of Malik, effectively erasing his role and his advocacy from the public record. Malik discovered further systemic abuse when he attempted to access school documents relevant to Rosa's case. His request for committee meeting minutes, rubrics used for scoring applicants, and the anonymized demographic data of past scholarship recipients were met with a bureaucratic brick wall. He was told he no longer had authorization, that the documents were under review, or that his access was pending legal counsel approval. It was a deliberate strategy of attrition, designed to exhaust him, to deny him the very evidence he needed to clear his name and expose the school's deep-seated biases. Each refusal was a subtle reminder of his powerlessness, a demonstration of how the system could effortlessly close ranks against an individual. The financial strain also began to surface. His suspension was unpaid, and while he had some savings, the uncertainty of his future loomed large. He started looking for other counseling positions, but his online search yielded little. The incident at Northwood High, though not yet officially public outside the community, seemed to precede him, a shadow darkening his resume. He received polite rejections, or no responses at all. From every application, he knew that Principal Hastings, with his extensive network within the education establishment, had likely already circulated his version of events, effectively poisoning the well for Malik. He was being financially squeezed, forced into a corner, his options narrowing with each passing day. One evening, as Malik was packing away some old files, he found a laminated photo from his high school graduation hymn, Jamal, in a beaming Coach Miller, who had just joined Northwood High as a history teacher when Malik was suspended. Miller, though quiet at the assembly, had always struck Malik as a man of integrity, deeply committed to his students. Regardless of their background, Malik remembered Miller's subtle nod in the auditorium. Could he be a potential ally, someone inside the system who might see the truth? The thought was a desperate flicker of hope in the deepening gloom. He knew that the system had tried to crush him, to make him surrender through quiet starvation of resources and relentless isolation. But as he looked at the photo, he felt a spark of defiance. He wasn't entirely alone, but the covert discrimination and systemic abuse, rather than breaking him, hardened his resolve. This was a war of attrition, and he wouldn't be the one to yield. The relentless pressure of isolation, the slow strangulation of his professional life, had pushed Malik to the brink. But instead of breaking, he felt a sharp, unexpected resurgence of the defiance he had suppressed for so long. The systemic abuse, designed to make him surrender, had ignited a different kind of fire. He knew he couldn't fight the entire institution alone. Not yet, but he could make a start. His first act of resistance would be quiet, calculated, and aimed at the heart of the school's carefully constructed narrative. His thoughts kept returning to Coach Miller, that subtle nod in the auditorium, the brief, almost imperceptible gesture of solidarity. Miller was an outlier in Hastings' well-oiled machine, a man whose quiet integrity had always stood out. Malik decided to test the waters. He sent Miller a carefully worded text message, not an accusation or a plea for help, but a simple, open-ended question. Coach, any insights on how things are really unfolding at Northwood regarding the scholarship review, just trying to understand the full picture from outside? He waited, not with much hope, but with a lingering curiosity. A few hours later, his phone buzzed. It was Miller. Meet me at the usual coffee shop, Saturday, 8 a.m. Don't be late. The message was terse, but the underlying sentiment was clear: a clandestine meeting, a willingness to risk. A spark of hope flickered within Malik. Saturday morning, the coffee shop buzzed with a muted weekend hum. Miller arrived precisely at 8 a.m., his gaze direct but cautious. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, mirroring Malik's own order. They sat at a small corner table, away from the casual chatter. Miller began without preamble. Hastings has been on a rampage. Malik, he's tightened everything down. No one's allowed to talk about your situation, especially not to students or parents. The message is clear: you're persona non grata, and anyone who defends you risks their own neck. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice, his eyes scanning the room periodically. A subtle act of vigilance. What about Rosa? Malik asked, his voice equally hushed. Miller sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. That's the worst of it. They've given her the Hawthorne Scholarship, but it feels hollow. It's a damage control move. Malik. They're trying to make it look like they fixed the problem, without acknowledging that you were the one who exposed it. And they've made it clear to Rosa that any further disruption could jeopardize her standing. She's walking on eggshells. Malik felt a surge of cold anger. Hastings had turned Rosa's triumph into a veiled threat, a silent warning. So they just made it look like a system error, not a bias issue. Exactly. And they've revised the scholarship committee protocols, adding more layers of bureaucracy, which only makes it harder to track true transparency. It's all smoke and mirrors. Malik, the real problems, the underlying biases, they're still there, just buried deeper. Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. But here's what I've been able to gather. Hastings is obsessed with the school's reputation, especially with the upcoming accreditation review. He's been pushing for stricter discipline for disruptive elements, meaning anyone who challenges the status quo. He then pulled out a folded napkin, quickly sketching a diagram. I've seen some of the internal review documents. They're heavily redacted, but I managed to piece together some patterns. There are multiple instances where minority students with strong academic records were consistently overlooked for opportunities. Not just scholarships. It's subtle, not overt, but it's there. Hidden in plain sight within the scoring rubrics and subjective committee notes. They grade down cultural fit or leadership potential in ways that disproportionately affect certain students. Malik's mind raced. This was it. Not just a gut feeling, but actual patterns, albeit hidden. Can you get me copies, or at least more details? Miller hesitated, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup. It's risky. Malik, really risky. I could lose my job, my pension, everything. I understand, Malik said, his voice firm, but this isn't just about me. Coach, it's about every student who will be silenced, every talent that will be overlooked because of cultural fit. Rosa got the scholarship. Yes, but how many others won't? And if Hastings gets away with this, he'll only become more entrenched. Miller looked up, his eyes meeting Malik's. The quiet determination in Malik's gaze seemed to sway him. All right, Edie said, a slow, deliberate nod. I'll see what I can do. It'll take time, and it'll be piecemeal. I can't risk being caught with large files. But I'll start looking for anomalies in the old data, especially around subjective criteria. It's going to be slow, but it might give you something to work with. He then added, a glint in his eye. You're going to need more than just documents. Though, you're going to need public attention. Hastings thrives in the shadows. That night, Malik returned home, a renewed sense of purpose fueling him. Eli, sensing his owner's shift in mood, nudged his hand with his wet nose. Malik looked down at his loyal companion. A sudden idea forming. Eli was more than just a pet. He was a therapy dog, certified and trained to provide comfort and support. He had often accompanied Malik to Northwood High, where students, especially those struggling with anxiety or trauma, found immense solace in his gentle presence. The next morning, Malik logged on to a prominent local news website. He found the contact information for Tanya, his journalist neighbor, whose name was often credited on investigative pieces. He composed an email, carefully omitting direct accusations, instead focusing on his suspension, the independent investigation, and the broad concerns about transparency in the scholarship process. He subtly hinted at systemic issues and a pattern of inexplicable decisions that he believed warranted public scrutiny, without revealing Miller's involvement yet. He attached a brief, sanitized summary of Rosa's case, emphasizing her academic merit and the initial inexplicable rejection. He concluded by suggesting that a deeper dive into the school's internal practices might reveal more than meets the eye. It was a calculated risk, but he knew Tanya was tenacious, and her newspaper had a reputation for fearless reporting. The next day, as Malik walked Eli in the local park, his phone vibrated. It was Tanya. "Malik, I got your email. This sounds big. Can you meet me? I want to hear everything." Her voice was crisp, professional, but with an underlying current of excitement. This was the first ripple in the stagnant pond Hastings had created. Later that week, Malik and Eli made an unscheduled visit to a small community center on the edge of the gentrified suburb, a place that served the diverse, often overlooked families of the area. Eli, in his official therapy vest, calmly greeted children and parents alike, his presence a comforting balm. While Eli worked his magic, Malik quietly engaged parents in conversation, not about his suspension directly, but about their experiences with the school, especially regarding their children's opportunities. He listened more than he spoke, gathering anecdotal evidence, noting patterns of disengagement and frustration. He realized that Hastings's control extended beyond the school walls, subtly eroding trust and participation from marginalized communities. As they left the community center, a young Latina mother approached Malik, her face etched with concern. "Mr. Rivers," she began hesitantly. "My son, Mateo, he's brilliant in math, but they told him he wasn't a good fit for the advanced placement class. He's so discouraged." Her words were a confirmation, a small piece of a larger puzzle. Malik knew this was just the beginning. With Miller's quiet efforts to gather internal evidence and Tanya's journalistic pursuit of the truth, he was building a foundation. Eli, by simply being present, offered a non-threatening bridge to the community, helping Malik connect with people who might otherwise be wary. The first act of resistance wasn't a grand, dramatic confrontation, but a series of calculated indirect moves, chipping away at the fortress of silence Hastings had erected. He was no longer just enduring, he was actively preparing for battle. Armed with tentative allies and a burgeoning collection of obscure truths, the quiet defiance had begun. The slow burn of covert discrimination and the painstaking accumulation of veiled truths had brought Malik to this pivotal moment. The subtle acts of resistance, the quiet gathering of evidence, had now forged a path towards a climactic confrontation. This was no longer just about his reputation. It was about exposing the systemic rot that had taken root at Northwood High, affecting countless students like Rosa and Mateo. The annual Northwood High School Fall Festival was Hastings' crown jewel, a meticulously choreographed event designed to showcase the school's unity and excellence. It was the perfect stage for a public reckoning, a place where Hastings' carefully constructed facade could be exposed to a broader, more diverse audience, beyond the controlled environment of the auditorium. Tanya had agreed. She recognized the strategic value of the festival, a public forum teeming with parents, community members, and local media. Malik arrived at the festival with Eli, his therapy vest gleaming in the afternoon sun. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and cotton candy, overlaid with the murmur of excited voices. Hastings, resplendent in a tailored suit, was shaking hands, beaming, projecting an image of benevolent leadership. Malik kept his distance, observing, waiting for the opportune moment. Tanya, inconspicuous in a modest jacket and carrying a discreet camera bag, moved through the crowd, already gathering informal interviews. Her journalistic radar finely tuned. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the main stage where Hastings was about to give his opening remarks. A group of students, led by Rosa Martinez, had unfurled a large banner. It wasn't overtly accusatory, but its message was poignant: justice for all, transparency for Northwood. The phrase justice for all resonated deeply in the diverse community. It was a bold act, orchestrated by Rosa, who, emboldened by Malik's silent support, had decided to use her scholarship as a platform, not a muzzle. Hastings' smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He quickly motioned to a security guard, who moved to remove the banner. This was Malik's cue. As the guard approached Rosa, Malik stepped forward, his voice clear and resonant, amplified by the sudden hush that fell over the crowd. Principal Hastings, why the rush to silence your students? His voice cut through the festival's festive atmosphere, drawing immediate attention. Hastings, startled, turned to face Malik, his face tightening. Mr. Rivers, I believe you are aware that you are not permitted on school grounds. This is a private event. And I believe, Malik retorted, his gaze unwavering, that the truth about Northwood High is a public concern, especially when it involves systematic denial of opportunities to deserving students. Tanya, seizing the moment, stepped forward, her camera held discreetly at her side, though it was clearly visible. Principal Hastings, Tanya Sharma, local reporter. Mr. Rivers has made serious allegations regarding discriminatory practices in scholarship selections and other opportunities. Do you have a comment? Hastings' face flushed. He was caught off guard, forced into a public confrontation he hadn't anticipated. These are baseless accusations. Miss Sharma, Mr. Rivers is a disgruntled former employee attempting to undermine the integrity of our school. Baseless, Malik challenged, raising his voice slightly to ensure it carried. Is it baseless that, for the past 3 years, over 70% of students selected for advanced placement courses and prestigious scholarships have been from the wealthiest and predominantly white zip codes? Despite a growing diversity in the student body, he was quoting the anonymized statistics Miller had painstakingly extracted, disguised as general knowledge. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Parents exchanged concerned glances. Hastings' composure began to crack. Those statistics are taken out of context. Our selection processes are rigorous and fair. At that moment, Miller, feigning casual interest, moved closer to the stage, making sure he was within earshot of Tanya. He deliberately dropped a small, plain envelope. As he bent to pick it up, he subtly nudged it closer to Tanya's foot with his shoe. Tanya, catching the subtle signal, bent down to retrieve it, making it look like she was adjusting her camera bag. Inside were carefully chosen copies of internal documents, a redacted email chain discussing cultural fit as a key selection criterion for the honors program, a memo from Hastings pushing for streamlined scholarship reviews, which Miller had noted led to less scrutiny of minority applications, and a heavily highlighted section of a rubric showing disproportionately low scores for leadership potential assigned to students from certain demographic backgrounds, especially Latinx students. These were not smoking guns, but clear patterns, subtle red flags. And what about Mateo Sanchez? Principal Malik pressed, shifting his focus. A brilliant math student denied access to AP Calculus. Was that also rigorous and fair just then? Mateo's mother, emboldened by Malik's direct challenge, stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. They told my son he wasn't a good fit. He loves math. He studies so hard. This is not fair. Her emotional testimony added a raw human element to Malik's statistical claims. Hastings, visibly flustered, tried to regain control. These are individual cases, not systemic issues. We address each student's needs individually. Do you, Principal Tanya interjected, her voice sharp, her eyes flicking to the envelope she had just retrieved. Or do you manage perception? We have received information suggesting a pattern of overlooking highly qualified minority students for opportunities, often under subjective criteria. She held up the envelope subtly, making sure Hastings saw it. The implicit threat of the documents becoming public was clear. Hastings's face paled. He knew what those documents represented. He had been so careful. His eyes darted nervously to Coach Miller, who met his gaze with a look of stony indifference. Hastings's carefully constructed image of an honorable, unbiased leader began to crumble under the weight of mounting pressure and emerging evidence. Suddenly, a student in the crowd, inspired by Rose's banner and Malik's courage, shouted, "What about the cheerleading tryouts, my friend? She's amazing, but they said she wasn't the right image." Another parent chimed in. "My daughter, an excellent debater, was passed over for the debate team captaincy. For someone less experienced, the dam had broken." The whispers of injustice, long suppressed, burst forth into a torrent of public grievances. Hastings, now visibly shaking, stammered, trying to address the growing chorus of accusations, but his words were lost in the rising tide of discontent. The climactic confrontation was not a single, dramatic expose, but a cascade of small, painful truths, each revelation chipping away at Hastings's authority. Malik, armed with Miller's evidence and supported by Tanya's journalistic presence and the community's nascent courage, had successfully unmasked the unspoken code of discrimination woven into the fabric of Northwood High. The witnesses were there, the evidence was emerging, and Hastings, for the first time, was truly exposed. The controlled environment had shattered, leaving him vulnerable to the public's judgment and the relentless glare of the media. The climactic confrontation at the fall festival sent shockwaves through Northwood. The carefully curated image of a harmonious, equitable school had been shattered, replaced by a raw, uncomfortable expose of systemic bias. The consequences unfolded swiftly, not just for Hastings, but for the entire community, forcing a reckoning with long-ignored truths. Tanya Sharma's article, "The Unspoken Code Unmasking Discrimination at Northwood High," hit the local headlines the following day, plastered across the front page with a damning photo of a visibly agitated Principal Hastings being confronted by Malik Rivers. The article meticulously detailed Malik's allegations, corroborated by the internal documents Miller had subtly provided, and amplified by the emotional testimonies of parents like Mateo Sanchez's mother. The paper highlighted the statistical disparities in scholarship and AP class selections, linking them to the vague cultural fit criteria and subjective grading rubrics. It was a journalistic triumph, concise and impactful, exposing the school's systemic issues without resorting to sensationalism. The immediate fallout for Principal Hastings was severe and public. The school board, under immense pressure from outraged parents and the relentless media scrutiny, was forced to act decisively. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, an emergency board meeting was called. Hastings, his face ashen, tried to defend himself, but the evidence presented by Tanya, combined with the growing chorus of community voices, was overwhelming. His carefully constructed network of influence crumbled. He was suspended indefinitely, pending an external and thorough investigation that was clearly designed to pave the way for his permanent removal. The news spread like wildfire through the community. A collective sigh of relief mixed with a palpable sense of vindication for Malik. But the consequences didn't stop there. The initial independent investigation, led by Mr. Thorne, which had conveniently ignored Malik's claims, was abruptly halted. The school board announced a new, truly independent legal inquiry, headed by a respected civil rights attorney, to delve into the school's discriminatory practices. This lawyer immediately began interviewing parents and students, promising a full, transparent review of all past decisions. The shift in tone from the school board was dramatic, a direct response to the public outcry and the irrefutable evidence. Legal action also began to brew. Several families, emboldened by the expose, announced their intention to file a class action lawsuit against the Northwood School District, citing systemic discrimination. Mateo Sanchez's mother was among the first to join. Her quiet determination, now a powerful force. The lawsuit sought not only financial damages, but also mandated structural changes to the school's policies, ensuring fairness and equity in all student opportunities. This legal threat added another layer of pressure, signaling that the community would no longer tolerate the status quo. The community's response was a mosaic of reactions. While many expressed outrage and solidarity with Malik, there was also an undercurrent of discomfort and defensiveness from some segments of the wealthier, predominantly white population who had implicitly benefited from the old system. Heated debates erupted on local social media forums, at PTA meetings, and in coffee shops. Some defended Hastings, calling the allegations divisive and unproven, clinging to the narrative of Northwood as a perfect institution. Others, however, began to awaken to the realities faced by their minority neighbors, publicly sharing their support for Malik and demanding accountability. The racial dynamics of the suburb, long simmering beneath the surface, were brought to a boiling point. The accusations of racial bias were no longer whispers but shouted declarations, forcing difficult conversations that had been avoided for years. The comfortable illusion of a post-racial community was shattered, and the suburb was forced to confront its own biases. Rosa Martinez, initially a hesitant figure in the background, blossomed under the newfound spotlight. She publicly acknowledged Malik's support, bravely sharing her own experiences of feeling overlooked and marginalized despite her academic achievements. Her voice, once muted, became a powerful testament to the subtle but pervasive nature of discrimination. She spoke at community forums, her articulate and heartfelt testimony further solidifying public opinion against the school's practices. Her courage inspired other students, who began sharing their own stories, creating a cascade of anecdotal evidence that painted a damning picture. Even Eli played a role. Tanya's article included a small photo of Malik and Eli, highlighting the therapy dog's calming presence during the stressful confrontation. Local news channels picked up on this human interest angle, often showing clips of Eli interacting with students during protests outside the school board office, further endearing Malik to the public and softening the image of him as a disgruntled employee. Eli became a symbol of comfort and quiet strength amidst the turmoil. The ripple effect extended beyond Northwood. Other school districts in neighboring towns began to quietly review their own internal processes, aware that the spotlight of public scrutiny could easily turn on them next. The Unspoken Code article became a case study, a warning against complacency and the dangers of unchecked power. The community began to organize. A grassroots movement, Parents for Northwood Equity, quickly formed, holding regular meetings and advocating for concrete changes to the school's administration, curriculum, and disciplinary policies. They created online petitions, held peaceful demonstrations, and demanded seats at future school board meetings. The quiet suburban dissent had transformed into a powerful, organized advocacy group. Malik watched these developments with a mixture of exhaustion and profound satisfaction. The public humiliation he had endured had been transformed into a catalyst for change. Hastings' arrest or court appearance wasn't the immediate outcome, but the consequences were far more significant. His career was effectively over, his reputation in tatters, and the system he had protected was now under intense legal and public scrutiny. The community, once oblivious or complicit, was finally beginning to respond, awakened to the deep-seated injustices that had festered beneath their serene surface. The silent code of discrimination was now a public conversation, and the fight for true justice had only just begun. The dust from Hastings Falls settled slowly, leaving behind a complex landscape of anger, hope, and lingering unease. For Malik, The immediate aftermath of the festival was a blur of interviews, meetings with the new legal inquiry, and the intense, almost surreal, sensation of being at the epicenter of a community-wide earthquake. He was no longer just a suspended counselor. He was a reluctant public figure, a catalyst for change, in the community's gaze. Once hostile, now carried a mixture of admiration and expectation. Rebuilding his life began. Ironically, by embracing the very public platform he had once shied away from. His home, once a sanctuary, transformed into a modest hub of activity. His phone buzzed relentlessly with requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and consultations. Tanya Sharma, recognizing the depth of the story, became a strategic ally, helping him navigate the burgeoning media interest. She arranged for him to appear on local news panels, discussing the broader implications of the Northwood scandal. Malik, initially uncomfortable with the spotlight, found his voice strengthening with each public appearance. He spoke with quiet conviction, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the dramatic revelations he shared. He meticulously avoided personal attacks, focusing instead on the systemic issues, the subtle mechanisms of bias, and the urgent need for transparency and accountability in education. His narrative wasn't one of bitterness, but of experience and a fierce dedication to justice. He shared not just his own story, but the collective stories of students like Rosa and Mateo, giving a human face to abstract statistics. He talked about the unspoken code, the invisible barriers that marginalized students often faced, not through overt racism, but through biased criteria, opaque processes, and the chilling silence of those in power. He emphasized that this wasn't just a Northwood problem, but a societal one, echoing in schools across the nation. He started a blog, initially a simple online journal, where he elaborated on the issues raised in Tanya's article. He posted anecdotes from his counseling days anonymized. Of course, shared relevant research on implicit bias in education, and offered resources for parents and students who felt unheard. The blog was raw, authentic, and resonated deeply. Comments poured in, not just from Northwood residents, but from educators and parents nationwide, sharing similar experiences, validating his perspective. The blog quickly gained traction, becoming a forum for shared grievances and collective strategizing. Social media became a powerful amplifier. Tanya helped him set up dedicated social media accounts, using the hashtag #UnspokenCode. He posted short, impactful videos explaining complex issues in simple terms, sharing snippets of his interviews, and reposting news articles related to the Northwood case. He highlighted key data points from the initial exposé, transforming them into digestible graphics. The response was overwhelming. Parents posted stories about their own children. Students uploaded videos detailing their struggles. And educators chimed in with insights and solidarity. The hashtag went viral in local educational circles, then spread nationally. Malik's follower count surged, transforming him from a local figure into a recognizable advocate for educational equity. Rosa Martinez, now an unexpected voice for change, frequently collaborated with Malik, appearing in his videos and speaking at community events. Her articulate and passionate calls for genuine equity, coming from a student who had directly experienced the system's flaws, added immense credibility and emotional weight to the movement. She spoke about the pressure she felt to be silent and how Malik's courage had inspired her to find her own. Her presence showcased the resilience of the students and the profound impact of advocacy. Coach Miller, operating still within the school system, became a quiet but indispensable source of ongoing information. He couldn't risk direct public appearances, but he continued to feed Malik crucial, anonymized data, revealing new patterns of systemic inequality. He exposed how the school, in its attempt to appear compliant, was merely shifting the discrimination to different departments, subtly altering selection processes for extracurriculars and disciplinary actions to maintain existing power structures. This insider information allowed Malik to counter the school board's PR efforts, which were attempting to downplay the scandal as an isolated incident. Malik Sal's social media posts often included updates from inside the system, maintaining public pressure and preventing the school from simply sweeping the issue under the rug. A surprising plot twist emerged when a former Northwood High administrative assistant, a woman named Miss Jenkins, reached out to Malik. Initially hesitant, she revealed that she had witnessed Principal Hastings actively manipulating records and pressuring staff to lower scores for certain students, particularly those from minority backgrounds. Years before Malik's incident, she had been too afraid to speak out, fearing retaliation. But Malik's public stand and the ensuing chaos gave her the courage to come forward. She had kept personal notes and copies of certain emails, damning evidence that corroborated Miller's findings and painted a clearer picture of Hastings's long-standing discriminatory practices. This new evidence was a game changer, demonstrating premeditation and a deeper, more entrenched pattern of abuse than initially imagined. Malik immediately connected her with the independent legal inquiry, whose investigation gained significant momentum with her testimony. The financial strain eased somewhat as Malik began to receive modest honorariums for his speaking engagements and consultations. He channeled most of this back into supporting the burgeoning Parents for Northwood Equity Group, helping them with legal, fees, and outreach efforts. His focus remained squarely on the mission, not personal gain. As awareness spread, Malik's message resonated far beyond Northwood. Educators from other districts contacted him, seeking advice on how to address similar issues in their own schools. He started hosting online workshops, offering practical strategies for identifying and dismantling systemic biases. The movement was no longer confined to a single suburb. It was becoming a national conversation about fairness, equity, and accountability in education. Malik Rivers, the suspended counselor, was now a leading voice in a growing crusade for educational justice, sharing his story not just to heal his own wounds, but to prevent others from suffering in silence. His act of rebuilding wasn't about finding a new job, but about forging a new path, one paved with advocacy and fueled by the undeniable power of a shared, undeniable truth. The independent legal inquiry concluded its findings with a public report that shook the Northwood community to its core. The report, meticulously compiled from a mountain of evidence, including Ms. Jenkins's damning testimony and Coach Miller's internal data, laid bare a systematic pattern of discrimination that spanned years. It wasn't just about the scholarship. It was about preferential treatment in advanced placement classes, extracurricular activities, and even disciplinary actions, all disproportionately favoring a select demographic. Principal Hastings, confronted with irrefutable evidence of his deliberate manipulation of records and pressure on staff, resigned in disgrace before the board could officially vote on his termination. His departure was a quiet, ignominious exit, a stark contrast to his earlier public showmanship. The school board, under the pressure of the impending class action lawsuit and public outrage, voted unanimously to accept the report's recommendations, which included a complete overhaul of all the student selection processes, mandatory implicit bias training for all staff, and the establishment of a permanent, independent oversight committee. The true culmination of justice, however, wasn't a single event, but a series of profound awakenings within the Northwood community. The class action lawsuit, now strengthened by the official inquiry's findings, moved forward, not just for financial restitution, but for systemic change. The legal team, working closely with Malik and the Parents for Northwood Equity Group, negotiated a landmark settlement. The Northwood School District agreed to establish a multi-million-dollar endowment for an equity and access fund, specifically designed to support disadvantaged students, fund diverse enrichment programs, and provide resources for minority students applying to higher education. Crucially, the settlement also mandated the implementation of a transparent, data-driven system for all student opportunities, with annual public audits. This was the structural change Malik had fought for, a tangible mechanism to prevent future discrimination. The emotional climax arrived at a special town hall meeting, convened specifically to address the future of Northwood High. The auditorium, the same one where Malik had been publicly humiliated, was now packed, not with hostile gazes, but with eager, expectant faces. The atmosphere was charged with a mixture of raw honesty and a burgeoning sense of collective purpose. The new interim principal, a well-respected black woman from a neighboring district, opened the meeting by acknowledging the profound hurt and betrayal felt by the community. Offering a sincere apology for the failures of the previous administration. Then, Malik Rivers was invited to speak. As he walked onto the stage, the crowd rose in a spontaneous standing ovation, a thunderous applause that lasted for what felt like an eternity. He looked out at the faces, seeing not just the familiar residents of Northwood, but also the broader community members who had joined the cause, united by a shared vision of fairness. Eli, quiet and calm, lay at his feet, his presence a comforting anchor. Malik didn't deliver a fiery speech. Instead, he spoke from the heart, his voice steady and calm, recounting his journey from the initial shock of public shaming, to the painful reawakening of past trauma, to the quiet resistance that had grown into a movement. He spoke of Rosa, of Mateo, of Miss Jenkins, and of Coach Miller, highlighting the courage of those who had risked everything to speak their truth. He spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor, a witness, and a guide. This is not just about a scholarship, or a principal, or even a single school, Malik declared, his voice carrying the weight of experience. This is about the unspoken code that exists in so many places, the subtle biases that chip away at potential, that tell some children they don't belong. Not with words, but with actions, with policies, with silence. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. We have torn down a wall of silence, but now we must build bridges. Bridges of understanding, of empathy, and of genuine equity. This is not the end of the fight. It is the beginning of a sustained commitment to ensuring that every child, regardless of their background, has an equal opportunity to thrive. Rosa Martinez, now a confident and eloquent speaker, joined Malik on stage. She announced her decision to pursue a degree in education policy. Inspired by the struggle at Northwood, her decision was met with enthusiastic cheers. Other students, once fearful of speaking out, shared their own stories of overcoming systemic hurdles, their voices radiating newfound power. The town hall transformed into a powerful testament to collective awakening. Parents who had previously been defensive now stood up, tearfully admitting their own blindness to the issues and pledging to be better allies. The community, once fractured, began to knit itself back together, not through forced unity, but through shared understanding and a commitment to genuine change. Malik was formally offered a new elevated position within the school district Director of Equity and Inclusion. It was a role he had never imagined, a testament to his unwavering commitment and the profound impact of his advocacy. He accepted, not to return to the quiet life of a counselor, but to actively drive the systemic changes he had championed. His work would now involve designing and implementing fair policies across multiple schools in the district, ensuring that the unspoken code was finally, definitively broken. The story of Northwood High and Malik Rivers became a powerful case study, not just locally, but nationally. News outlets continued to follow the story, showcasing the ongoing reforms in the community's healing process. Malik's blog and social media platforms evolved into a national resource for advocating for educational equity. He became a sought-after speaker, traveling to other school districts, sharing Northwood's painful lessons and inspiring similar grassroots movements. The clear message he left behind was not one of vengeance, but of vigilance and unwavering hope. Justice is not a destination. It's a continuous journey, he often said, his words resonating with audiences. It requires constant vigilance, empathy, and the courage to speak the truth. Even when your voice shakes, the unspoken code can only survive in silence. When we choose to speak, when we choose to pause, and when we choose to act, we dismantle it, brick by painful brick, and build a truly equitable future for all our children. His journey had come full circle, from being silenced and shamed to becoming the resounding voice of justice, leaving behind a legacy of transformative change that extended far beyond the quiet suburb of Northwood.